to Naveen Connect, where spirituality meets the messy but beautiful reality of being human. I'm Jean, and joining me, as always, is my co-host Humphrey. Today, we're exploring a topic that feels increasingly urgent in our lives: why spirituality is essential in our modern world. The existential pressures we face today, from climate change to unknown impacts of AI, from social fragmentation to personal anxiety, these pressures aren't just external problems to solve. They're catalysts demanding us to change from within. Recent Gallup polls show that 33% of Americans now identify as spiritual but not religious, with traditional religious membership continuing to decline. It seems many of us are searching for something deeper, something that helps us find stable ground in this uncertain world.
That's exactly right, Gene. The data certainly suggests we're not alone in this search. As we navigate these times of profound uncertainty, spiritual growth offers something unique. It's not just about belief, but about active, dynamic development of our inner capacities. It's about developing deeper awareness, resilience, compassion, and wisdom to meet the challenges of this moment. Today, we're not here with all the answers, but rather to explore the questions we're asking in our own lives. How can spiritual practices help us find meaning amid this chaos? What inner resources can we cultivate to face outer challenges? And how might spiritual growth help us reconnect with ourselves, others, and the universal energy? These are the questions that matter now more than ever. Let's start with what might be the most fundamental questions many of us are asking today: the search for meaning. Simply acknowledging a need for meaning isn't enough in these times. As we will explore in this first segment, spiritual growth is about the active practice of seeking, discovering, and embodying meaning. It's about transforming that passive sense of emptiness many people feel into an active journey of discovery. Gene, I've noticed more people in my life asking the big questions about purpose and meaning, especially after all we've collectively been through these past few years. The mental health data is pretty striking. 23% of US adults experienced mental illness in 2022, with young adults showing even higher rates at 36%. Have you experienced this growing search for meaning too? And what do you think is driving this?
Yeah, that's a big first question. Well, I mean, of course, I've experienced kind of the search for meaning. I personally think, when I look back in my life, the only time I really start asking for meaning is when things have gone to shit.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So with all the things that has been happening to us as a society, right, with COVID and us all being locked up, I think that was, for many of us challenging and
Right.
would cause us to take a step back and kind of reevaluate. So
Right.
I personally, believe that question of why is really, really important. And it's kind of like that litmus or like the stimulus for us to start beginning to answer that question of what is this all for, or what is the meaning of this, right? Because, when things are great, we're not necessarily sitting there and asking ourselves, why are things great? We're just kind of enjoying it or appreciating it. But I think when things are bad is when we ask the why. And perhaps I theorize that it's maybe a part of our our survival mechanism, right? To tell us to reevaluate our lives, right? To figure out the purpose.
Yeah.
So, yeah. What about you?
Yeah. Look, yeah, I definitely felt that I think it's like you mentioned, everything's happening. If you think about from COVID, if you just go back to COVID, from COVID happening, the pandemic, people getting locked down, then sort of the division that's been happening politically, the wars have kind of kickstarted lately.
Mm-hmm.
I think everybody's is like overwhelmed. It's like, Jesus Christ, what's happening? It's like everywhere you look, it seems like everything's chaos. So it definitely feels like, like how we're going to get out of this. So I can only imagine that everybody else must be feeling some level of that.
Yeah. I think that's why the question that we're posing today, our main question is, or what we're trying to answer is like, why is spirituality important? Why that the reason it's important to answer right now is because I think all of us are trying to search for something
Yeah.
amongst kind of the chaos, right? And I think sometimes I wonder the difference between religion and spirituality, right?
Hmm.
And how they help people find meaning, right? Because in Gallup data polls show that 17% of people express a great deal of confidence in organized religion now, yet
Right.
80% of Americans still stress some form of spiritual belief.
Right.
In your experience, how do these paths differ? Like, what's the difference between, spirituality and religious institutions, I guess?
Right. Right. So I've been thinking about this particular point a lot lately. And um, so religion offers more of a structure sort of format. If you think about it, it's like an organization, right? So it offers you a structure approach to a sense of sort of community, the set of rules that you have to follow or dogmas that you have to follow. And it because of the cycle that we're living in, generational cycle, we're at a stage where people just don't trust those organizations. Like the trust in organizationals are at the lowest level
Mm-hmm.
possible. So the whole thought of religion as a structure and a place that I'm going to follow these rules, especially for young people, it's just not existent there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas spirituality, for the meaning of spirituality, right, which is in essence self-discovery, finding yourself, right, finding your connection. It's an individual process, right? There's no set of those. You can do it at your own time and your own pace. Everybody's journey is different. So that concept of being your own journey, I think, appeals especially to the young people, right? Because they're not constrained by the whole dogmatic and structure approach there. Um, so I see how people are. We all innate have that search for. There's got to be something more. There's this spiritual thing that we know inside of us, but in our generation, we were we were tied to that organizational structure in religious. I think that's changed a lot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think a lot of what has transpired that's come out of organized religion,
Right.
right, and kind of the darker sides of organized religion.
Right.
For me, I feel like there's the religious institution, like the
Mm.
people that make up, right, the religious institution,
Yeah.
and their frailties, right? Because we're all human. No one's perfect, right? We will all
Correct.
make mistakes.
Right. Right.
Granted, some mistakes are, worse than others, right? But we're all people. But
Yeah.
then there's the actual religion itself. So for me,
Right.
I really separate the religion, the teachings, and then the people that make up, let's say, the congregation or even the priests or the
Yeah. Yeah.
pastors
Yeah.
or whatever,
Yeah.
right? And I personally, I mean, I grew up, I was baptized Christian. I went to Catholic school
Mm-hmm.
until, I graduated high school, so I have a lot of experience, I guess, within those religious constructs. And for me, I found that the teachings themselves, like the moral teachings themselves,
Mm-hmm.
they were great for me, right?
Right.
Because it gave me a sense of what was viewed as right and wrong. It gave me a
Mm-hmm.
sense of like morals and ethics, which I found to be very comforting as you're developing and you're trying to understand, you know, your values in the world, right? And then later on, I switched from like what you would call like organized religion into
Right.
spirituality, right? Because spirituality, like you said, kind of provides that flexibility, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I already had the basis of religion, right, or Christianity to give me kind of like my foundational like stepping point,
Right.
right? And then later on in life, like I would say after high school into college, I started really exploring, spirituality from like a philosophical sense, right? And then you can kind of put psychology in there, and
Right.
trying to understand yourself and discovering yourself a little bit more, right?
Yeah.
And I guess my point is religion and the teachings of each of those religions, I think as a basic construct can help an individual, but I think there's more,
Yeah.
because that basic religious teachings, I think they teach you stuff, but they don't teach you about yourself,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right? And then when you get to a part in your journey where maybe you're in a place in your life where you're ready for that next step, you start even questioning, like, the things that I learned from this religion, is that truly something that I value as a core value of mine?
Right.
Or is that something that I was taught?
Right.
Right. And for me, a lot of the things that I learned out of Christianity through my spiritual journey, I realized, like, yeah, those are pillars of things are that ring true and what I think is right
Hmm.
in life, right? And then I
Right.
kind of take that and I make that into my own, right? And then kind of, what does that mean to me? How do I want to act and behave based on
Right.
these values?
Right. And it's interesting because as you know, I did the same. Like I went through that phase of searching. I grew up in a Catholic sort of, with Catholic school, Catholic environment. Then I had my family with the Yoruba religion. So I went through a phase in college of researching all the
Yeah.
religions. And what you just said is true. Is the message is all, it's great. The actual message that, if you distill the message they're giving you, it's actually right. And it's actually the same message across the board, right? Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter which religion it is. If you distill the actual message, it is, be compassionate, be
Love your
good to love
neighbor,
your neighbor. The power is within you.
yeah.
You can, whoever searches, ask and you shall receive. There's all these things that are kind of messages that are there.
Hmm.
But then we go into the whole structure or organizational side, and I'll speak only on the Catholic side because I just had an experience last week where there's sort of like a form even of control of, you have to follow these things, and unless you come here, this, we have the solution, nobody else has the solution, that kind of mentality. And I think that's what's, the new generation of people are kind of discovering, like, look, that can't be it, it's got to be something else, right?
Hmm.
And I think that's where the shift is happening, and
Hmm.
that's where a lot of people are kind of not discovering but kind of moving towards spirituality, because it's kind of like, I understand the message, I just don't appreciate this sort of confines that you're giving me to drive this, right? And it's interesting because in preparation for today, I was listening to the Dalai Lama, and he literally said, because of all of this happening, it's like, look, all the religions are saying this, some religions believe in one God, some religions believe in this, there's distinct things, but at the end of the day, we're all saying the same thing,
Hmm.
right? And that's what should matter. Forget about everything else. What
Yeah.
matters is, and we should all live our life that way, because at the end of the day, if you think about it, if we take the core message, the world would be a whole different place if we all look at each other with compassion and we thought about each other, we saw each other as our brothers and sisters across the board. It would
Yeah.
make a huge difference, right? So because of that, I do think that, especially the gens, this newer generation, I think that's why they're navigating so much into the spirituality, because they kind of see things from, hey, I don't want to go through the trouble of peeling the layers and doing this and going to the constraints to then do the work. I just want to do the work and get to where spirituality wants to take me, right? Which is the self discovery portion.
Yeah. Yeah. I get that. I mean, I still believe that the real, like, structured religion from a teaching standpoint, like the
Yeah,
bigger ideas, right?
yeah,
Those are fundamental, and those are things
yeah.
that
I
I
know.
think are good. Again, it's people in their frailties, right? Like I myself, like when I was going to church, right?
Yeah.
Like you fall into the, do I fit the mold, right?
Yeah.
Like am I am I doing the right things, right?
Yeah.
And you forget that it's not about how others perceive you in your like religion, like in your beliefs,
Yeah.
right? It's about your relationship and your connection
Yeah.
to that higher power, right? That nobody can see or judge, right?
Exactly. That's the thing. Like, it's funny because I was in, so in Ireland, I live in Ireland, and in the city that I live in, they do a novena, right? So it's 9 days of sort of prayer, like masses and everything for all sorts of times in the day. But it's the point is like if you ask for, so it's for you to, if you have a particular need or you want to be thankful, you're gonna go there for the 9 days. And I found myself, we did it as a family, and I found myself going, everything that's like I enjoy like the messages were all great, but I actually felt really uncomfortable, and every part of it was kind of like had to go through the proper pieces of the mass where I had to say I'm a sinner, or I'm like I'm not a
Mm-hmm.
sinner. I'm not gonna say like I find myself kind of going like no, I don't like that. And I was looking around the church, and I noticed that there's a lot of older people in the church, but none of it. There were maybe a few young people in it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I honestly believe if they were to eliminate some of that, and it's just, I mean, I'm familiar with Catholic religion, but if all religions were to eliminate those sort of dogmatic components of structure and work on the message, I
Mm-hmm.
think there would be a massive change. I think people would fly because the messages are actually, like you said, it's the fundamental messages are actually on point, and and they all talk about in the case of Catholic and Christianity, the words of Jesus. What's inside? Power is within you. You got to go through. So I do see that change, and I think it will change. My hope is that it will change for the better.
Well, I mean, we've talked about a lot about the concept of like meaning making in this conversation about spirituality, right? Like, so how do you understand this process? Is meaning something we discover or something we create?
So for me, I think meaning is something that we create, right? So I do. Meaning is something that you create through your own experiences, right?
Mm-hmm.
So and I've heard a lot of people saying like, well, I don't know what's the meaning of life, what's my meaning, whatever. Like, and if you think about it again, going to the line of the core messages, we're here. Life, it's what it is. It's life. It's going to be good. It's going to be challenging at some points. It's going to get opportunities, but how you experience life, it's what creates that meaning, right? So how you deal with the situations, how are you in the moment when things happen, right? And I think we're going to be
Mm-hmm.
talking a lot about that today. How to be aware, how to be in the moment, how to be aware when you're actually present and you're actually experiencing things, and taking that step back and saying, okay, how I can see what's happening. How am I going to deal with what's happening? Or how am I going to deal with this? Am I going to be okay with it? Am I going to decide? But it's my decision, my consciousness doing it. I think that's the difference. So that's when you build that meaning. Whereas personally, I think the concept of I got to find a meaning, like meaning is somewhere and I need to find it, right? I think it's a construct of the world we're living today, right? And I think we've been conditioned to kind of, you got to find meaning in your life. But you think about it, that meaning is like, oh, you got to find meaning in your work. You got to
Mm-hmm.
find meaning in this. It's like, there's always sort of like a purpose or a meaning that you're going to have. And if you don't
Yeah.
have it, so if you're not happy with your work, then you're not happy with your meaning, you're not happy with it. So it creates this kind of, you know,
Void.
weight that, that whole thing that you're like, oh, and then you're depressed and you're sad. But if you take a step back and say, look, I we all have to work. We all like life is what we have to. There's certain things that we have to do within the constructs of life. But if you say, look, I understand what's happening, and I am like, if I'm going to spend time with, uh, you go out in the street to a shop and somebody yells at you or says something, it's your decision, right? Like, am I going to help that person or am I going to react to that person? So that builds meaning, right?
Yeah.
Like we all can create that meaning in our life. And some of us that are parents, our meaning could be helping our kids go through. Some of us that are married, in our job, we can create meaning by helping, our coworkers. So every day we have a chance to do that, as opposed to finding this majestic sort of box that has a meaning for everything.
Yeah.
Because people, I think, get lost in that process, and that's what causes the whole frustrations and depressions and everything else, because they're trying to find some meaning somewhere
Yeah.
instead of building themselves.
I don't know. It's interesting because as you're talking, I'm realizing that I'm not like I used to be a more black and white person. I mean, you know this, Humphrey.
Yeah. Yeah.
But as we're talking, I realize I'm a lot more gray, right? Because in the earlier question that we posed between religion and spirituality, I was like
Hmm.
both. And
Yeah.
then even in this question of like, do we create meaning or do we discover meaning? I'm like, it's both, right? For me, because I think the whether it's you're discovering meaning
Hmm.
or whether you're creating meaning, it's what is the thing that drives that, right?
Right.
The thing that
Right.
initiates it, I guess, is the better word. Because if it's an external thing that happens to you, you're
Mhm.
discovering meaning,
Right.
right? Whereas if it's an internal thing that initiates it, you're creating it,
True.
right?
True.
So like if I personally believe that the universe is all around us and there's an energy there, right? And it's guiding us right into and gives us hints
Hmm.
on what we should be doing. And I think that is you're discovering meaning on that
Yeah.
path, right? You're tuning into what the universe has to tell you, right? And the hints, and you're acting on that with a leap of faith, right? Whereas like internally, you're creating meaning by what you're saying, right?
Right.
Like by making active choices and things in your everyday life to create that meaning that you believe in, right?
Hmm.
And you materialize that into the world,
Right.
right?
Right.
So again, I'm
The gray area. The gray. I know that makes
the
sense.
gray area. Well, I mean, it's funny because I have to say this because, as we're talking, we sound like we know what we're talking about, right? But the reality is for me, the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know stuff, right?
and that's the key, Gina. And I'm so glad you said this, because look, we're especially today we're discussing something and we're expressing our beliefs and our thoughts and on this, especially in the concept of spirituality. But we're no like nobody knows it all, and that's important. Like you gotta be we're humble enough to know, look, we don't ever know. Just because it worked for either of us or because we're expressing an opinion doesn't mean that that's what you have to do. Or I think fundamental, especially when you talk about spirituality, it's an individual journey and people experience it differently. We all experience it different. That's the big thing, right? It's
Yeah.
we all experience things differently, and that's the key. Right. So please don't take anything we say here as like, hey, we're trying to preach or say this is the way it should be. We're exploring these concepts together as we go.
Well, I think it's interesting because, you know, with technology these days, social media, things like that, like we have access to kind of share like our thoughts and with people. But I think there's also the other side of social media where, so many of us compare our lives to what we see online,
Right.
right?
Right.
So
Right.
like measuring our worth against whatever we're seeing, right? And
Right.
then so how might spiritual practices help us break free from those external validation traps?
So that's a that's a big it's a big theme. That's a big theme. I'm talking like I'm talking about when I remember what we talked about. It's like that's a big theme that we need to cut it through. Um, no, but I always feel like, look, as humans we all have this desire, right? So one of the biggest things with us as human beings is this concept of desire. We all desire this, we're built with this concept of desire and wanting something, right? And that has a place for in a spirituality arena is to help you, not just find yourself, self-discovery, but also to help you create into the world. So you desire things that are going to help other people, desire things that are going to benefit people. That's part of visualization, that's part of helping you go through that process, right? So that's why practices like when you meditate, when you do sort of being aware, even when you pray, that's what you're asking for something that you want, right? You want something, or you're trying to make sense. That deals with that desire, right? Now, unfortunately, again, going back to the world we live in, the consumerism of the world we live in is taking that desire, that concept of desire, and make you feel like, oh, you want what other people want, right? You
Yeah.
want this, and that's what you need to be happy. You need that to
Yeah.
make you happy, right? So, and unfortunately, social media, which is a great platform, but used in that way, it has exponentially made that worse, right? Because you see
Yeah.
so many people, oh my God, they have this, they have that. And it's so easy in social media to like take a picture with, whatever the latest pair of runners or the latest car. And people are like, oh my God, he has that car. I need to have that car, right? So it's just like, it's just only for young people. It's just like, oh my God, if I don't have what they have, like if I don't have the latest things, I'm not going to be cool. I'm not going to be happy. But then they get it and they're still not happy, right? Because
Yeah.
just things don't make you happy. So it's this whole, again, cycle of I need to have what they have, or the people need to see me doing this, and that'll make
To
me
fill
happy. And then it
some level of a
happens
void,
to
right?
fill the void, and then it happens and nothing happens, right? So when you and personally, I went through this problem. Like I remember when I started meditation, which I couldn't do for the life of me, but when I actually started doing meditation, you kind of eventually do the self discovery that you really don't need outside stuff to be happy, right? Like if you're not happy, nothing that you get is going to make you happy, right? And it sounds like a cliche, but it's true, right? If you're not happy, nothing that you get is going to make you happy. You got to
Yeah.
be content. Let's go content with yourself. And then, yeah, you want a car, get the car. You like that car, make a conscious decision. I like that car, get the car. But don't go, I'm going to be happy when I get that car. Because then you're attaching that happiness or that thing with the car, right? And in the social media sort of world that we live in, especially for young people, it's like, is that sort of cycle of, I got to get what they have, and that's going to make me happy. And then when we get it, we're not really happy. So by turning into spiritual practices like meditation as an example, or prayer, or just spending time with yourself and finding that you're okay. Like if you had nothing else, you're okay. Like we're okay, right? And again, this is a deeper concept, but the concept of being of nothingness, which is a major concept in spirituality, is like you're okay. Like we're very, as we are, we're great. We're very powerful. You can create anything you want, anything you visualize, you can create it. The way you are, all of us are unique, right? We're all unique. We have all these visions, but we don't realize that because, again, of all the noise and the things that we are in the world. So I think that by shifting, and I'm speaking now as a parent, that's something that I worry a huge amount because of my girl, because of all the kids, right? Like I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't want them. Kids up to a certain age are content with themselves, and then they get to a point where it's just seeing social media and stuff like that, and then you see them changing and start kind of comparing themselves. That comparison is what I think, because, I believe that spirituality would change that or can change it.
I mean, when I'm listening to you talk, it brings me back to our first question, the difference between religion and spirituality,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the notion that, I think about my experience, like when I was trying to be a good Christian, I kind of almost put on this like costume of quote unquote what a good Christian is supposed
Right, right,
to
right.
look like, act like, et cetera, et cetera.
Right,
And that was an external stimulus, right? Pressures, right?
right,
And I think that's why spirituality was so important for me later on, because spirituality to me was more internal, right? It helped me kind of figure out what was right for me, what I really believe in, what were my core values, why do I, care, why am I here, and what makes me happy, those simple
right.
things, right? And I think you need to know that to understand, going back to the why,
Yeah,
finding the meaning, you understand why, and then you can move forward with the broader life, right? Like spirituality helps you kind of develop and find meaning for yourself. And I think the more you know yourself, right?
right.
The more you can make those decisions that will ultimately make you happy, but the why they will make you happy, right?
Yeah.
You're talking about an external thing on social media telling you buy this car and it'll make you happy, and
Mm-hmm.
the person kind of like completely skips the why would it make me happy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Whereas the person that spent enough time developing those answers within themselves, you say, yeah, go ahead and buy the car because it's going to make you happy,
Yeah.
because
Exactly.
it's going to make you
Yeah.
happy
Yeah.
because you have the answer to the why, right?
Exactly.
And so for me, I feel like it's really important for us to spend that time with ourselves and
Mm-hmm.
not with the external world before we start, like, because I think spending a lot of time with the external world without fundamentally knowing like who you are, what makes you happy, what you stand for,
Right.
like it can make you get caught up in that like mousetrap of like, hey, or the hamster wheel of, hey, I'm comparing myself, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas like
Yeah.
when you go internal, the weird byproduct of it is that you no longer compare yourself to other people,
I
right?
know. I
Because
know. Right.
you know what you like, you know what you don't like, you know what you stand for, you know what you're not going to stand for,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
set those like boundaries and those lines for yourself as you're engaging with the external world, right? And so
Right.
you're very clear, right? So I feel like, that helps you from like getting caught up in comparing yourselves. But I
Mm-hmm.
think, at least for me, the more I know myself, the more I know other people, and I can give, compassion to other people, because I know, like, man, I am not perfect and I do not know everything. And I can be, mean and moody sometimes and whatever, because I'm having a bad day.
Right.
Right. And because I know that about myself, I'm able to give that empathy and compassion to somebody else that maybe was a jerk to me, because I'm like, well, he's probably, maybe they're having a bad day today.
Right.
Right.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
so I think, you know, the more you kind of know yourself, you seek less external validation and you seek
Mm-hmm.
more like authenticity, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
right, you just want something that's real, good or
Yeah.
bad, like ugly or bad or whatever. You appreciate what's real versus, you know,
Yeah.
anything else.
Yeah. Totally agree. Totally agree on that.
So, so this, I mean, I think what I'm hearing is that, spirituality isn't just about finding answers to life's big questions, right? It's about actively kind of engaging with those questions, letting them kind of transform us. So it reminds me that meaning isn't something that we just passively kind of receive, right? It's something we participate in creating, and through awareness and our choices and our practices.
Exactly. So I think so. Active engagement leads us into naturally to our next exploration. So if spiritual growth helps us find meaning amid chaos, It also helps us develop the inner resources we need to navigate that chaos effectively. The data shows us that many of us are struggling, with 36% of young adults experiencing mental health challenges and rising rates of anxiety across all demographics, which is horrible. But
That's good.
spirituality offers practical tools for building resilience, emotional regulation, and inner peace. So, in this segment, we're going to explore how spiritual practices aren't just abstract concepts, but concrete ways to develop the internal strength we need to external challenges. They're not about escaping reality, but about engaging with it more effectively. I've noticed in my own life that when I maintain certain spiritual practices, I feel more equipped to handle stress and uncertainty, and I can vouch for that. The data seems to back me up. Studies show spiritual correlate with lower rates of depression and anxiety. With that, what practices have you found most helpful for building that kind of emotional resilience, Gene? And why do you think they work?
Okay, so it's a journey for me. So I think in high school, in my earlier years, I did a lot of journaling.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, recently I went back and I looked at my high school journals. I don't know if I could read it page to page, but I think journaling is really good because it helps you kind of process like what's happening to you. So remember I was talking about like the internal or external in like things that initiate kind of like just the discovery of or
Yeah.
creating of meaning.
Yeah.
So for me, like journaling was a way for me to process all the things that were initiated externally for me.
Got it.
Right. And it also, when you journal, you can actually go back, like what I did recently, and you go back and you can realize, like, you can see certain patterns of the way that you were thinking,
Mm-hmm.
right? Certain moods. And then also, like, now, I mean, I'm 46. I went back and I read my high school journals. You realize how much you've changed over
Yeah.
time,
Uh,
right? And
right.
so I think journaling, I kind of want to get back into it because I feel like, I stopped for a while. I
Mm.
have other practices that I do, but journaling for me, it helped me process the events of, what was happening in the physical world. And then it ultimately pushed me into discovering myself more. Right.
Got it.
So after you see these patterns of your behavior or your moods or whatever, you start trying to understand, like you're trying to figure out like, how you are as a person, right? So
Mm.
obviously, in college, I had psychology classes, et cetera, et cetera. So I did like Myers-Briggs
Mm-hmm.
tests, right? Like there's numerology tests. There's all these tests for your birthday. What does your birthday mean, right? Like there's all these things that you're reading and for me, it was more of like, I don't necessarily, I look at things and I go, does that ring true for me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I did a lot of like the self discovery to develop, my core values, what are my needs, what triggers me, right? And I could go
Mm-hmm.
back to my journal and look at all the times that I was triggered, right? And and that helped me kind of build my inner strength. And then, later on in life,
Mm-hmm.
meditation, right? You did I mean, meditation has been a big thing. I feel like it's all around us, right? Where
It
everyone's
is. It is.
meditate, right? And so I went into meditation, but I mean, truthfully, it still is very hard for me, right? Because I can't stop thinking, and then in meditation, well, one form of meditation, which is not guided, right? It's the meditation to kind of like relieve stress,
Mm.
right? You're taught to kind of like push away thoughts, and that's a struggle.
So, so, so it's again in preparation for today. I was listening to a Buddhist monk about meditation in particular, right? Because
Yeah.
like you, I didn't do any journaling. It's funny. In college, I didn't journal, but I actually went to like writing kind of thoughts. I call it deep. But I don't remember this, but there was a deep thoughts bit in SNL back in the 90s. So I used to call it deep thoughts that I used to write
Uh-huh.
all this thought process that I had. But I tried meditation as a young a lot, and I just couldn't get into it. And I finally, when I first started doing yoga, I got into it. But I can actually say I fell into it. And listening to this Buddhist monk, it hit me, right? So he said exactly like he goes, most people start meditating and then they start thinking about other things, right? Because your mind will just start rambling.
Yeah. Hmm.
And then you get frustrated because you think meditation is you have to stop your mind and you have to be calm and whatever. And that's
It's
not
not
it.
what I think. It's
No,
what
no,
some of
no,
these
no, no. But you're
meditation,
not, no,
they're
but not
like,
you.
don't
But
think.
no, but that's
You know
my
what
point.
I mean?
So the part that most people are like, oh, meditation, you gotta be calm, but that's not it. That the reason I'm explaining this is because that is the best description I've ever heard of meditation. That is not the purpose. The purpose is for you to understand that there's a difference between your mind and you, right? To be able to acknowledge that your mind is doing all those thoughts. So if you start when you start thinking to the meditation process, you can kind of sort of separate that and see your mind from that perspective. It's almost like if
Mm-mm.
you were almost if you could elevate yourself and see yourself from another angle, right? Like just go,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
for your mind, like if you can see that your mind, your thought process, right? So you can kind of create a gap, right? So that gap allows you to kind of then say, wait, if I can understand my mind is rambling, then there's got to be something like I'm not my mind. Like I can
Oh,
like
that's
the
interesting.
mind is something else, right?
So is it more like your mind is like kind of like the logical synapses firing, and then meditation gives you awareness, right? Like there's a difference
Exact.
between like awareness and
That's the point.
like
Awareness. The
logic.
whole point of meditation is you finding that awareness, being aware of, look, there's your mind. We all have the mind and it's a great tool, right? And most Eastern philosophies describe it as a knife. Your mind is built to cut through things, analyze, logical, as you mentioned, right?
Yeah.
But left to its own devices, especially us that have people like us that have very active minds, it can go crazy.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
a lot of thoughts, a lot of things. Like it's funny. Most people, like if you're just trying to meditate and you start thinking about the grocery list and like whatever case, like all these thoughts, people start freaking out and frustration. And it's like instead, if you look back and you step out and say, "Oh, my mind is doing that," then that realization, that awareness, allows you to then go to then start getting higher in the spiritual realm. Also, like, oh, wait, I'm not my mind. My mind is doing that, so I can direct my thoughts. Then I can direct and I can use my mind for something else, right? It's like I don't, as opposed to being controlled by your mind, right? The
Hmm.
overall goal is just like to get you to that point where you can say, okay, I'm the person in control. Like I am aware of my mind. I'm aware that I can go into multiple places, but I'm going to direct the thoughts, but I'm going to jump into that thought, jump out. But it's my conscious decision on what I'm going to do, how am I going to feel about those thoughts. But that piece of, oh, I'm thinking about stuff, I'm doing this wrong. It's like, no, that's right. Your mind being aware of that, and that helps you become aware to what's happening. And for me, that awareness, which a lot of people call mindfulness now, right? But like being mindful, being aware of not just your mind, but of any moment. Personally, for me, has been the biggest change of my life.
Mm.
Because if you remember back in the day when we were in our previous endeavor and we were crazy hustling and stuff like that, I can now say I wasn't aware of, like, I wasn't living the moments. I was just kind of going through the motions, but not really living the moments.
Yeah.
Whereas now I actually live the moment. Like if I'm with the girls, I'm like trying to spend the time with the girl, like be there with the girls.
Like present.
Like if I'm looking at a movie, like anything I'm doing, I'm trying to be there, and it makes a big, like, I'm like, wow, it's a big difference. Now it also makes you realize how much in the past, because you and I experiences, how much I wasn't experiencing, how much I just on my life I just went through and I didn't experience at all.
Yeah.
But once you do, it makes a big difference. It changes how you see everything.
Meditation, I think, for me was so hard that I had to like find potentially like another way to practice and build like emotional
Yeah.
resilience, right? So like, I've been kind of like hiking more these
Yeah,
days,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
so and there's something about being in nature that seems to reset things,
Yep.
right? At least for me, I think a lot of people, because recent research shows 55% of people spend time outdoors
Yeah.
specifically for emotional and mental health benefits.
Right.
So do you experience that too? Like, what is it about connecting with our natural world that feels, you know,
Different,
good?
right?
And like, especially, when we spend so much time, like, on our computers and stuff like that.
That's a so flat out. Yes, I experienced the same thing. I mean, for me, I've always interested. I always need to be close to water
Hmm.
and sort of greenery. Um, so for me, the best place in the world is Yosemite in California. Just for whatever reason, it's just that place because it has all the combination of things, water and everything else surrounds me. But I think it's so from a spiritual point of view, you think about it, everything's alive. Everything is technically alive. Even nature is alive, and I think that connection to like being out in nature helps us connect to the overall universal energy, right? Like
Hmm.
it makes us feel like everything is connected. Like even if we're by ourselves walking, or if you go out and like you go hiking, just that concept, right? It makes you kind of, especially if you're in full awareness, it makes you understand that there are bigger things than we are, right? Like they're
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
we're all connected. And it's interesting because I used to go hiking a lot in San Francisco, like in Marin,
Yeah.
and I didn't get at the time I didn't get the experience. Like, I was like, oh, it's just hiking. I like hiking, but now it's like a whole different experience. Now I go hiking, I was like, oh, like you enjoy, like you breathe the air, like it's a whole is that connectivity, and I think innately people feel it, even though they're not understanding what's happening.
I mean, there's a whole
Their
science
being
behind it
feels it.
too, right? Like there's the grounding aspect of it, the
Yeah,
forest
yeah,
bathing, there's
yeah.
there's all that stuff. But I mean, I'm curious about how different generations approach this question, because some younger, friends, we talk about, they go to, they're doing journaling or they're
Right.
doing therapy, while older folks, like us, we like, community and time outdoors. I mean, look, the research confirms that Gen Z gravitate towards introspective practices like journaling, 26%, and
Right.
therapy, 19%, while baby boomers prioritize social connection, 73%, and time outdoor, 59%. So, what might these differences tell us about how spiritual needs evolve with life experience?
Oh, this is a great question. So,
I'm
okay,
starting to feel like I'm like on like this like weird. I always thought like it was a personalized path, and it is. But like if you think, I mean, I journaled when I'm young. Now I'm hiking. I'm like falling into these like.
it's so okay. So there's so the answer. My answer is this. So there's like I read this the fourth turning book. It's this amazing book, but the main concept of generations is the key on the part, right? Meaning that there's an overall cycle, and this is true on in every philosophical um, experience, or even in religions. There's a rhythm. Everything in life has a rhythm. Everything has a cycle, right? Everything of the
Mhm.
year, everything else. We're no different. I mean, our generations are within 84 years. That's the cycle. Okay. So depending on which generation we fall under, what stage of our generations is how we experience things and what kind of things we gravitate towards, right?
Mhm.
And our generation, which we are Gen Xers, which are closer to the boomers and Gen Xers because of we were kind of brought up by the same people, right?
Yeah.
Uh, we are more the community. Like you think about our childhood, it's more about the community concept, the being outside, being free. That's what we're used to, right? So anything that has that concept or that has that idea helps us. That's how we sort of connect. That's how we kind of find secureness. That's how we can, we feel secure. We do that. Whereas if you think of the younger generations, in a way, they'd be more protected, right?
Okay.
Not to go into all the details of why and the reasons of generations, but they're in if we were talking about the chaos, we were thinking about COVID and everything that's happened, social media, the internet, they're more into the self. They're more into doing it their own, like not, their community, but community in the social media sense, not community of like, I'm going to go out and meet people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for them, it's all about doing a lot of individual work, self doing, self awareness. So anything that's self thing that they are comfortable with because that's what they're used to from a general perspective. Now the beauty of it is that it's because of the cycle, it'll come back. Everything kind of ties, right?
Well, I
Together.
mean, don't you think? I mean, we talk about the spiritual journey, right? And at
Mm-hmm.
every mile marker or whatever, you kind of need different things at different times,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So like, isn't like what how people practice spirituality, whether that's like internal versus going hiking, that's just kind of like how your life kind of unfolds. Because I'm not a younger Gen Z by any means. Like you said, I was Gen X, but I also started out right journaling. So it was
Mm-hmm.
very much an internal, inward turning thing. And I do feel like when you're younger, you need to go internal, right? Again,
Right.
to set up your own core values, to set up what makes you happy, to understand what you need and all the triggering things. Those things help you identify, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like what is the construct or the pillars in your life, right? And
Right.
that
Right.
helps. I mean, at least for me, it helped me feel a little bit more stable when
Yeah. Yeah.
externally everything's like crazy, right? It kind of
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
anchors you. And then now that I'm older, right? Like, and I've already kind of defined, myself, I could focus a little bit more outward,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. Yeah.
I could, how they always say like, oh, put on the mask on yourself before you put it on other people,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah. When
So
the
I
plane's
think
going
like
down.
I've gotten to a point in my life where I've already put on the mask for myself and I've gone
Hmm.
inward. Now I can like go out
Right.
and you know at least talk about my experiences,
That's true.
right?
No, no, that's true.
and and be a part of a community, feel more connected. And I
Mm.
think as you get older, you start thinking about like what is the legacy you're leaving, right?
Right.
But like
Right.
for you, like to your kids, what are you teaching them, right?
Right.
Et cetera, et cetera. Um, so
That's
I
true, Gene. That's true.
yeah
That is true. That's true. Because I find, especially on the last point, tying it up, you're right. Because it is and it's, young people, we're all young, we're all about ourselves. I mean, I have teenagers in this household, so they're all about themselves. That's all the word is. But you're right. It could be, it's part of that. It's like as you get
But
older
don't you think
and
that
you
that's
find yourself.
like a built-in thing? Like for young kids, right? When they're like when they're in high school, they're thinking about themselves.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
it's
yeah.
not almost like an evolution process, right? Because you do have to think about yourself and where your place in the world is, what you da 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 da. I mean, the byproduct of them always thinking about themselves, maybe not so good sometimes. But
Okay. So I 100% agree with you. And I think that, again, this is a deeper concept that we're going to explore at a later time. But to your point, right? Because
yeah,
when you're young is when you're into yourself, and that is the perfect time to do that self discovery and so forth, right?
yeah,
We should spirituality should be a bigger concept at that age, right?
yeah.
The whole, if you discover, like, talking about myself, had I had the clarity or the guidance that I have now back, I don't know, when I was a teenager or even younger, I would have shortcutted the whole spiritual journey, right? Like I could have shortcutted that whole process.
I mean,
I
that's
mean, think
life.
about it. You know what I mean? Like, no, but it's, it's
That's
true.
said by every older person
It's
to a
true,
younger
right?
person. If I knew
It's
what I
true.
knew
If
today.
I knew now, what I know. But it is, but if you think about it, right, that is true. It's like, because as you said, it's built in. When you're young, you already have the tools. You're self centered, you're thinking about yourself, you're already prime for that work.
Yeah.
You think about it, right?
Yeah.
And then as you get older, you can press. So again, life is set, like we're set up that way. We're built in a particular way.
I mean, the idea of spiritual growth, like it suggests kind of like this active process rather than just holding like just these certain beliefs, right? Like these,
Right,
like,
right.
so how do you think about spirituality as a growth journey change how much we might approach difficult experiences or suffering?
Um, I think so. I think if you look at it from like we were just saying, that spiritual journey, the cycle, right? Like you're young and you're self-centered, and once you get older, you can start understanding and seeing things from a different perspective. If you apply that, you think about the concept of life. Life is always going to have, like I said, there's going to be good things and there's going to be some challenges. There's going to be some difficult, like it's just part of life, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
people are going to die, people are going to run into problems. It's just part of life.
Mm-hmm.
But when you understand that everything is a rhythm and a cycle, and you have that, you do that internal work, and you realize, like, look, as you said, if I'm okay with myself, then I can deal, I make decisions on how am I going to deal with those situations. It helps you understand that because something bad happened doesn't mean that your life is going to crumble, or it doesn't mean that your life is going to, it gives you the tools to cope with those things
Mm-hmm.
and understand it's just part of the cycle of life, right? It's just part of the things that happen. So instead of looking at it as oh my God, my life has ended because something bad happened, it helps you understand, look, it's going to pass. Just like everything else, it's just a process, it's going to pass. But spirituality gives you those tools to cope.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, the younger you do it, the better. That's why I wish I would have done it in the past. But there's many times, like with the concept of hindsight, if I look back, there's many things that I could have
But don't you
handled
think,
better because
yeah, but
of where I
don't
am
you think
now.
that's a part of the growth journey though? Like I like look,
But not everybody
I
does. It is, but not everybody does it. That's what my point is. You're right, but not everybody. Just because you get older doesn't mean that you do that. That one doesn't mean the other. Getting older doesn't really mean you have this wisdom and this spiritual journey done. You know what I mean, like you can get older and not do the spiritual journey.
yeah, you can. I
You
I think that everybody just has their own timing, right? Some people are a little
true,
bit more will need a little bit more time in
true,
the cycles, right,
true,
to kind of
true,
develop their stuff, right? And
true.
other people, they just need to learn one time and they're ready for the next lesson,
That's
right?
true. That's
But
true.
I feel like, I mean, I agree with you. There's an ebb and flow to life, right? I don't like looking at it like, I think there's challenging stuff. I don't like looking at it as like bad or good, right?
Yeah, true.
Because
Trust true. John, yeah.
it's either it's challenging or it's
And
easy.
nothing. You're right. Nothing's bad, or it's how you take it. It's nothing's
Yeah, it's a
good or
mindset
bad.
thing,
It's just
right? Because
situation.
I I challenge myself in looking back into my life and the amount of growth I did during challenging times, right?
Mm-hmm.
Way more than when it was easy,
Right.
right? I think challenging times you get to see what you're made of, right?
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
all the talk of this or that. I think I'm, patient, I'm resilient. You don't really know, right?
Yeah.
Until you get put through that cycle of
Right.
challenge to really see what you're made of, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
after that, you come out with a little bit more confidence, like, oh, yeah, maybe I am,
I am on
resilient.
that.
And then you get
Yeah.
put through that cycle more and more, right? As you go
Right.
through different things in your life and as you go on your growth journey.
Right.
And I think that helps you become even more aware of, you know, what you might be strong in and what might you be weak in.
I agree with you 100%. I do believe, to your point, right, of when you go through a challenging time that you learn, you know, that, and I do believe this in my heart. If there's a lesson you need to learn and learn how to deal with, you know, a challenging opportunity, if you don't learn it, it will keep
Just
repeating itself.
repeating the
It will
cycle.
keep
Yeah.
repeating itself in cycle. You know, like you said, there's people that kind of go learn it, okay, move on. There are people that just kind of repeating it, but it is. I do believe that there are lessons and things that are now to the point of the question that are part of your spiritual journey. A lot of those lessons and challenges are part of your spiritual journey to help you go through that, right? As you go through
Yeah.
them, there's a lesson in there. If we're aware, and I'm glad you said it that way, when you have awareness, you can see for what's going on. You realize, like I, uh, like that for me personally has been it was a big shift. Being aware helped me see, okay, like asking the question of why this is happening, right? So if
Yeah.
something's happening, you ask the why, and then you kind of see it from, oh, okay, I get it. And it helps you manage it and go through it and then come out at the end with the lesson that you need.
So, there's this, we're doing research on this podcast episode, and there was this data point that was crazy to me, right? So the CDC data shows that 43% of adults aged 18 to 34 report feeling lonely, and Harvard research found that 81% of lonely adults also experience anxiety or depression.
So that's crazy.
So, where you're talking a lot about the cycles and things like that. What's the difference between being alone in a way that nurtures us spiritually versus isolation that depletes us?
Yeah. um, so first of all, I think that the 43% that kind of shocked me between 18 and 34. That actually that was a shocking statistic. That many people feel lonely. And hopefully, as we're going through this process, and we're going to help people not feel so lonely or find ways to get out of that. So I think if you think of spirituality, right? So you think about it, where I look at it, spirituality. We talked about self-discovery, you go in, you got to find yourself, meditation, prayer. Those activities are kind of isolating activities that you're choosing to do, right? So you're choosing to be alone to do the work that you need to be, right? So you're choosing something. Whereas if you think about the concept of I feel lonely, it implies that it's something that you had no choice in the matter. Like, you know that you're choosing not to be with people. It's just that people are not. You feel like nobody wants to hang out with you, kind of scenario. So the difference is, one, you're choosing, you're being actively engaged. Of, hey, I want to do this. I want to spend some time with myself to kind of. But I do have friends or family or people that I want to be in the community, and I think that's the difference. In spirituality is the whole concept of, you know this because I say it a lot. To me, the whole process of spiritual journeys to understand that we're all part of the universal energy, that we're all together, that we're not alone, right? That we're all the same. So once you realize that, then you're able to do that kind of, hey, I want to meditate, I want to do these things on my own, but I want to connect, right? And that's going to help me connect to people. Whereas what that statistic is telling me is that there's a lot of people that are just not connecting to anybody. they're just feeling lonely. And interesting enough, here in Ireland, it's actually bigger. The percentage is actually higher here than in the States, and there's a correlation with the old generation. But I think that's if people take anything away from here today is that by doing the spiritual work and starting as little as a meditation or a prayer or whatever you find comfortable, you helps you understand that we're all in this together. We're all part of the same energy. We're all part of the same universe, and you're not alone, right? And that realization then helps you see people differently, helps you see them with compassion. It helps you accept people better. Like you said it before, like, I'm not perfect, so it's okay if somebody else is not perfect, right? Or,
Yeah.
versus I think the world we live in today, it's again going back to that question of the social media that we had earlier, because we see these things need to be a particular way, and a lot of people feel
I mean,
like
it's
if I,
curated
yeah, it's curated. So,
to
so
perfection.
I can imagine, what I mean? Like, that's why they don't want to, they probably feel alone because it's like, I don't have that, or I'm not going to the places they're going,
Yeah.
or I cannot afford it. So, in a way, instead of bringing us together, it's
Yeah.
separating us
Yeah.
more.
I think so. Okay. So repeating back to you what you said, because I think I can be on the same school of thought, is there's a difference between solitude,
Mm-hmm.
right, which is intentional, like you
Yeah,
said, and then isolation, which is involuntary,
exactly.
right? So like solitude to me, you choose to take a pause,
Yeah.
right? You choose and you say, hey, I need to reconnect with myself. So you're not alone, right? You're spending time with yourself, right? Right?
Yeah.
Like, and that can be very like restorative, right? It lowers, stress. It can spark like creativity. Like when I go hike, sometimes like a good idea comes into my head, right? And
Right.
then, like you said before, also like making you more present when you're like, you know, later on, like you take the time to think and you're like, oh man, I was like having dinner and I could have like been more present, you know, engaged with my daughters in a conversation, but I was thinking about this other thing for work, right? Like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I need to check myself next time, I need to do better, right?
Right.
So those things, I think, being in solitude and having, a way to reflect, whether that's journaling, maybe it's hiking, swimming, I don't know, for whatever your practice is that you choose. For you, it sounds like it's meditation, right? To take a step back, I think helps you
Yeah.
reflect. And then I think for isolation, it's involuntary, right? You
Yeah.
feel like there's something missing, like you're craving a connection, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's nothing there to connect to,
Right.
right? And then I
Right.
think that lack of connection makes you feel lonely because it's the absence of something,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And I
Yeah.
think that then, like it traps you into, you know, I don't know, doom scrolling. I don't know. Like, I don't
No,
know.
it's you know what, at like this point, and especially for young people, it is tough. It's really like this is 18 to 35, right? To 30 something.
34.
It's
Yeah.
tough. 34. That is, do you think about the young people, right? Like at their prime, what I consider the prime age of being young. It is, it's tough. And most of them, you mentioned, they're going to work, right? They're doing stuff, but they're not having true relationships. They don't have the colleagues. They don't have, like, they're feeling lonely means you're not really connecting, right, with anybody. And that has to be a really tough place. And I honestly hope we help in any way to revert that fact. I want, especially just telling people, look, once you go inside, you realize we're all the same. And it's okay. You can talk to that person. You can,
Yeah.
even that colleague that annoys you the hell out of you, at the office, and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm going to have to do this project with this person. When you do the work, you kind of go, it's all right. He's
I
not that
mean,
bad.
that's such an important point, Humphrey, because we don't develop awareness or resilience and compassion in isolation.
Mm-hmm.
We develop them in relationships, right?
Right?
So, and that brings us to what might be the most uh, profound gift of spiritual growth offers, which is healing, the fundamental disconnection of modern life. So,
Yeah.
the statistics we mentioned earlier are stark, right? They're 21% of adults report feeling lonely, with 61% lacking close relationships, and 81% of lonely adults experiencing anxiety or depression. These numbers reflect a deeper crisis of connection to ourselves, to each other, and to the sacred or meaningful dimensions of life. So, in our final segment, we're exploring how spiritual growth helps us move beyond what we might call the divided self, beyond the separation from our authentic nature, from others, and from the sacred that runs through all things. Despite all of our social media connections, many people report feeling, lonely. That there's a Harvard study, I guess, they found that 21% of adults report feeling lonely, with 61% lacking close relationships. So, have you experienced this paradox? I mean, we talked about it a little bit, Humphrey, but how might spiritual approaches to connection differ from a purely social interaction?
So, so I have to say I haven't personally felt the paradox, but my uncle had. So since I was a kid, I was a young person. My uncle had a saying: if you have more friends than fingers in your hand, you're a very lucky person, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which when I was young, I was like, oh, geez, that's ridiculous. I have I have tons of friends, whatever. But as I got older, I realized that the truth of that statement in the world we live in today, especially when you consider it from social media and everything else, it is hard to build true relationships with sort of, I call it the competitive nature of the world we live in. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like people are always competing. It's hard to find truth, even in the social media where you see. So, like you said, the statistics are horrible, but it reflects almost like the world we are living today, where people are just looking outside, comparing themselves to other people, right? Always kind of looking and see where do I fit in, and not really trying to connect. Whereas, as you were saying, the spiritual practices, such as like for me, meditation, being aware is the biggest one for me, has helps you see the connections that we all have, right? Sees you
Mm-hmm.
see people with compassion. It helps you, understand other people, and and like the person that we both know, just shift your point of view. Used
Yeah.
to say, just shift your point of view a little bit, right? That's all it is. It's just if you
Yeah.
shift your point of view, so I believe is right, especially with the awareness or mindfulness or practices of being in the moment, you see people for who they are, right? And when you stop seeing somebody as a competitor or as like, oh, I want to have what they have or sort of thing, you understand them better. You do get to see them at least with compassion, right? You start seeing it in a different way. And for me, on a personal level, I do. There's a part of my daily meditations. I do like 5 mantras that I got to repeat, and the last one is the hardest one. So the last one is, I am a mother to the world,
Mm-hmm.
right? The concept being a mother doesn't matter what the kids do, doesn't matter how bad they are, she's always going to look at them with compassion and love because that's what a mother does, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you consider that concept of I'm going to look at everybody from that point of view, right? Like I'm going to look at them with love and look at them with compassion. It changes now. I'm going to be honest. It is. I say it's the hardest one to do because on a day-to-day basis, people look at and do stuff, and you're like, "Oh my god!" You're like, "Oh my god!" But if the more you repeat it and the more you look at it, if you do that shift, uh, it does help you see and connect to other people. I mean, it's impressive what you uh, and and it helps take people away from that loneliness that,
Yeah.
that we're describing and the statistics that we're seeing that are horrible at this time.
I mean, we go back to talking about solitude versus isolation, right? One is you're
Hmm.
choosing it, and the other one
Right.
is it's kind of like this disconnection, right? And I feel like, I mean, we're picking on social media a little bit in this podcast because I think there's great things. I mean, we use social media, and I think that it allows for a platform to kind of share your ideas. But I
Hmm.
think sometimes also social media, because it's very one sided, right? It becomes transactional, right?
Right.
It's hard to connect. I mean, I think a lot of the the things that people connect to end up being something that stimulates like an emotion or something that they
Hmm.
can empathize with. But
Hmm.
generally, I think with social media these days, it's more transactional, right? It's one way going out, and it's very
Right.
hard to connect to that. Whereas I think with spiritual connection, like even this conversation, right? We're bonding in a sense, right? Because
Right.
we're freely sharing our, like, what we think. We're being vulnerable about, our experiences, etc., and that helps you kind of understand the other person a little bit
Yeah.
more, right?
Yeah.
And then so I think there's that bonding of maybe shared interests, shared values, or and then that ultimately you inadvertently build your own community, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it.
So, I mean, I think what I worry about with kind of building with the construct of spirituality, right? Because religion is very structured, and
Hmm.
spirituality, it's kind of like, we've presented it more of like, it's like a customized, pick your own way of going, right? Do you, do you see that with this more personalized approach, like, what are the benefits and challenges? Because for me, I
Yeah.
see it, and there's like good things and
Yeah.
then potentially bad things that can happen with just kind of like you picking whatever you want on a spiritual
Right.
path.
Right. Yeah, that's actually a very interesting point. So personally, I think, look, so if you think about spirituality, as we're saying, it's very individual sort of process. Like we all go through that journey. It's all unique and individual. That piece is empowering, right? Like if you think about it, like it's because you're the one in control. You choose. You're the one that's doing the self discovery. So that piece is very self empowering and very helpful. But at the same time, that could be risky because if you get too caught up in the hey, it's all about me and it's only me and I'm only me, then you can become very lonely. You can go into that isolation side, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
then, and unfortunately, there are people, uh, and that when they go into their spiritual journey become spiritual, I call them spiritual preachers, right? Like, oh no, no, I'm here, I'm the best because I'm doing this and you're not. So they themselves start separating people, and then they themselves start isolating themselves by comparing. I'm in a better place than you are, kind of scenario. I'm better because of that. So there is a risk of that individual process. That said, as we were just talking, by building community, by finding your community, right? That's where the power comes when you the work you got to do it individually, but the growth comes from the community. When you find your people, when you help other people, and when you're grateful about the things you're getting and you share that with other people, I think that's the difference. But there is a slight risk on that, like of people sort of pushing people away or becoming lonelier.
Yeah, human frailty, man.
We're frail people. We're frail
I
people.
mean, I think, spirituality is, I think customizing your own kind of like path is good, right? Because I think everybody's in a different place. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and not everybody's at the same place at the same age or at the same time in their life,
Right.
et cetera, right? So being able to personalize that, I think is can exponentially help somebody grow,
Mm-hmm.
right? But I also feel like if you're in isolation, there's that fragmentation away from community. There could be blind spots that you have, right?
Right.
Like, and I think, like, I should say this, I think community doesn't mean that everybody thinks like you or
Yeah.
everybody has
Yeah.
the same beliefs as you. I think you do need a level of checks and balances where you do have a couple of friends that are always kind of challenging what you truly believe to really dig
Hmm.
through to see what is really authentic to you.
Right.
At the end of it, though, I feel like we all have that like instinct inside of us, whether we call that our conscience, Disney calls it our Jiminy Cricket, right? But
Hmm.
there's that intuition that we have, that tells us if we're on the path or we're not on the path, right?
Hmm.
But I think that there's ways to anchor a more personalized spiritual approach, which is like, maybe you find a mentor, right? Like whether
Right.
that's a coach or somebody, right? Like to help you kind of guide you through whatever you're going through. I mean, it could
Right.
be, and then the community where they don't necessarily believe everything that you do, but you feel a sense of like you belong, right? Like
Right.
at the end of the day, you guys have certain core pillars that you guys all believe in. You might
Yeah.
not agree on every single aspect.
Hmm.
And then I think, you know, I think those two things could potentially help you along the way.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um, there's this idea that we talked about spirituality and authenticity and how we like will technically gravitate toward that. A
Right.
part of that getting to your authentic spirituality is that you have to shed kind of like layers that are not so much yourself, right?
Yeah.
So I think, how do you distinguish between like your authentic self and the personas you've created, right? Like
Right.
how do you navigate that in your life? Because I mean we work together, right? So I had other personas, right? Like
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
had
Well,
Etsy,
we all
which
have. I know. That you know what this is, so we all have the concept of personas, right? Like we present ourselves different, at like personal,
at
like from a
work
dad
than you are at
at
home,
work, at home, as a dad to your
as a
partner, right?
baseball
Like
coach, as
you
a
have different
whatever
ways. So
roles you
we
play.
do have different personas that we have to play. I One thing that I discovered as I was going through my spiritual journey is the being true to yourself, right? Like find it would, even though we have personas, even calling personas, we have roles we have to play for whatever the job that we have to do or the situation. It's who you are inside. Like the not being, I consider that as not being fake. Like being true to yourself means not being fake to like be true to yourself. And what I found is vibrations, like
Okay.
which the young people call it. They call it the vibe, but it is like you vibrate, you feel different. Like you. For me, when you're being fake, you kind of feel it, and when other people are being fake, you feel it, right? Now, personally, I would get nervous. I would get anxious in the past. Like if I was pretending to be something, like I was
Hmm.
faking it to I make it kind of thing. I was like, I would get
Hmm.
nervous. I was like, I even start sweating. Like it was a horrible experience, right? Now it's kind of like I just feel it. I was like, oh, okay, I get it. Like I'm just so being aware again. Going back to the concept of the awareness. So you're aware. It's like, wait, am I putting up like am I trying to pretend to be somebody else for something, and then you can catch yourself and again make a conscious decision.
Hmm.
But to me the biggest change has been feeling with other people. Like I can feel it. I can vibrate differently with other people. Like I can
Hmm.
feel it now, which I personally never had that. There's other, like in my family, a lot of people have different, skills and things like that. I never had any, maybe I had it and I never was aware of it,
Hmm.
but now I feel it. Like I can. Like if I'm with somebody that's really fake, oh my God, like my whole body just, I just start
See,
kind of thing. So it helps me, but I find the awareness of it now. So being aware of it helps me kind of both for myself and other people, right? So if I'm aware that I'm pretending to be something, then it just kind of helps me. It's like a checkpoint. You're like, wait a minute. Why are you doing, asking the why question? Why are you doing this? And you kind of go back. When it's with somebody else, like when you feel somebody else,
yeah.
then I just kind of, now I just be like, all right, nice meeting you. It's, or, you kind of
See,
know how to deal with the people for the person.
I think I could I can come from a completely different school of thought on this then.
Now, before you
'Cause-
answer, hold on. So you're understand. I'm not saying that doesn't mean I'm not. You can still play a different role. You can have a different persona.
yeah.
You can be yourself and still have to play a different persona for whatever. Because I do believe we all have to play different roles. Like if you're in a business meeting, you're not gonna be. You gotta be in a business meeting, right? You're not gonna be
Right.
like, oh, so you do have to play a different role, but you can still be true to yourself in that role, right? Whereas there's a difference between the role and just being fake. See what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
yeah.
Like that's what I'm saying.
So okay,
So you
so
can still play the role, but
what is the difference then?
so the difference is okay for so I am gonna use myself as okay, so I can play the dad. Okay, so as a dad, you have to be stern sometimes, right? You gotta be like, look, I'm and then but doesn't mean I'm like always, but I'm still being myself. Like I can, you can be stern or you can deliver say a dad role without having to take in the, the mannerisms or the things of other people or like the way other people do,
Okay,
right?
okay.
As a part, you know
I
what I
think
mean?
I get what you're saying. So I think what you're saying, the difference is between fake and just playing a role is fake is devoid of your own like established core values that you've already set, right?
Exactly.
Like so when you start on your spiritual journey, you set your core values, what you believe in, what your worldview, right? Basically. And so when you're being fake, it's like you're acting counter to that.
Exactly.
But when you're playing a role, that those things you're still very much acting towards.
Exactly.
Okay,
Exactly.
I can agree with that because that's how I look at it. Because it's like I don't necessarily feel like I mean I think false layers then is more of like you trying to figure out like what
What
really
those
rings true.
values, what those
Yeah,
core, right? What are
what
those
rings true
core things
for
for you?
you, and
Yeah,
then how do you behave based on what rings true to you, right?
exactly.
Whereas like for me, like the idea of personas, right, and then your authentic self. For me, I have a bunch of personas, right? Like I had a work persona, right? I think we
Right.
called her Etsy, right? So I mean, I can be very a matter of fact and to the point when I'm at work, right? But
Hmm.
when I'm social in a social setting, I'm a lot more relaxed and a lot more casual, right? And I looked at personas more of like a way to get the whatever goal done,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
right? Like even in this podcast, I have this podcast
yeah,
persona,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
because
yeah.
in order for me, I'm usually a very private person, so in order for me to like put myself out there, I have to have like the podcast armor on that
Right.
I'm in it, but I'm still very much operating from my perspective of like what I think, what my values are, right? What
Right.
I
Right.
think
Right.
should be, what my worldview is, right? Like that
Correct.
stuff
Right.
isn't fake, right?
Right.
It's I think the authentic self is still there underneath what I call the persona
Yeah.
or my armor, but it's still
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. No, it is, and so in yoga, no in yoga, but in different practices, but I'll use yoga because it's the one I'm familiar with. It's the concept of identity, right? It's you find your identity, who you are, who you truly
Mm-hmm.
are, and you maintain your identity Now you can behave different. You can have a role, a persona, but your identity doesn't change. Whereas fake, what I call fake, is when somebody's not really being their identity, right? Like they change that identity based on what they need to achieve to
Like what's
manipulate somebody or something like
popular
that,
during
right?
the
What's
time, what's
popular or
trending,
whatever it is,
whatever.
right?
Yeah.
So, and that through spirituality, that's part of the goal of not just finding the self, finding self-discovery and finding the connection to the energies, is finding that persona, finding that identity, who you really are, and being true to, like you said, being true to yourself when it comes to that.
So we're coming up on, our last two questions. So one question that's coming up is, with climate change, we mentioned earlier, recent surveys show 85% of young people are moderately worried about climate change, and 57% are very or extremely worried. How might spiritual practice that foster reverence for the natural world change how we respond to ecological crises?
Well, I think when, like we were saying earlier, when we're talking about, the connection to the outside and hiking and so forth, I think spiritual practices, when you start going into spirituality and you start in deep, you understand that everything is life. Even though if it's a tree or a river, whatever it may be, the earth that we're here, we're all connected, and it's all part of the whole rhythm of life. But in reality, it's all life, and as part of that, we want to maintain it and keep it in balance, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of makes you appreciate things, right? Now,
Yeah.
I'm not just so that people that are listening, it's not like I'm saying, you're not gonna you're not gonna farm, you're gonna do things. Like, we do need to use the earth, but it's how you use it that makes the difference. I think when you look at things, just like we've been talking through the whole podcast, when you look at things from a awareness, when you're aware that the earth is giving us, like we're using it for our sustenance, for instance, right? We need to farm to be able to eat. The river, the oceans are giving us water. But when we understand it's a relationship that we have, we are more conscious of how we use it. Right? We're conscious of how we use the resources and how we look at it. Whereas the way we are today, I think the majority of us are not really conscious, and we're abusing it.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I like hiking so much, because you go into the forest and you do realize that everything's kind of interconnected, and you're just a small piece of a much bigger thing. So
yeah.
I'm drawn to that concept of seeing the sacred kind of like everywhere. I mean, I see it everywhere when I'm like hiking. So, I really believe, it's in all people and in ordinary moments. Like, what practices help you kind of develop that kind of perception, and how might it change how we relate to people with different beliefs or backgrounds?
So, I'm a proponent of meditation all the time, but I think, on top of meditation, I think, being grateful, so practicing gratefulness, like just being appreciative of things, for everything, as small or big it is, and awareness, which we've been talking a lot about today. But I think and the reason I'm saying this is because when you're aware and you're grateful, it helps you sort of see, again, people from a different perspective. It helps you see the earth and our resources differently. It helps you see things, and at the end of the day, it helps us see what you just said, which is that we're all part of a bigger connection, that we're all interconnected, and they're all part of a bigger sort of energy connection. And I think once you see that, then it helps with that connectivity, and ideally it helps us get rid of that loneliness problem that we've been talking about today. But yeah, being aware and grateful, I think if we do those two things, it helps us see people in a different way.
Listening to our conversation today, I'm reminded of how trees respond to storms. When powerful winds blow, trees don't just endure by being rigid, they survive by being strong and flexible. Their roots grow deeper, their trunks develop resilience, and they bend without breaking. Spirituality in today's world seems to function much the same way. As the storms of uncertainty, disconnection, and complexity blow around us, spiritual growth isn't about escaping the wind. It's about developing deeper roots of meaning, a stronger trunk of inner resources, and the flexibility to bend with life's challenges without losing our essential nature. We're all facing these storms together, and perhaps the spiritual journey is about learning to not just weather them, but to grow through them.
Well, Gene, as we navigate these uncertain times, we discovered spirituality isn't a luxury. It's essential for becoming more fully human. With over a third of young adults facing mental health challenges and 67% of people reporting social and emotional loneliness, we're clearly experiencing a collective crisis of meaning. But there's hope in action, where there is that 5-minute meditation practice, or the awareness practice that I mentioned, or Gene, your journaling and value exploration, or simply taking a pause in your day. These practices aren't just nice ideas. They're powerful tools used by millions to develop the awareness, resilience, and compassion needed for our times. If you're wondering where to start, we have created a free self-discovery pathways at Naveen.com designed for busy people at any stage of their spiritual journey. They offer simple structures without promising quick fixes, because real growth takes practice, presence, and patience with yourself. That's all the time we have today. Until next time, this is Humphrey and Gene signing off. Stay connected, stay kind.